describes acts of extreme violence in graphic detail and may include discussions about demonology and the occult, topics that caused widespread panic during the 1980s. This content may not be suitable for children under the age of 50. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
And now, from the Imperial Studio in the Free City of Longwood, welcome to Grogtalk.
Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Hopefully, it says I have an excellent connection, but I'm seeing a little thing there, so. Conan homage, yes, thank you. Well, it's good to see everyone out there. I'm James, welcome to Grogtalk. Hopefully, things will continue to work. Always interesting to do a stream late in the evening. I hope everyone is doing well out there. Just, that's right, the next generation. It's good to see everyone out there. Short version is, Americans had just celebrated their Thanksgiving, and glad to be back. Actually, I was in Puerto Rico last weekend. Some of you may have seen some pictures out there that I put on Discord, and really a great time. In fact, I found out that the production hobgoblin and his mate are going to have an offspring. So I'm going to be a grandfather. The realm continues for another generation. An heir has been secured. So we're very happy about that. And so yeah, it was very exciting. Got back on Monday. And so I'm glad to be back with all of you here. Thank you. So what do we got going on? Thank you. Congratulations. Oh, it's good to see everyone out there. The Angry Monk, the Queller, Minions out there. There's Vic. Speaking of Vic, Rob, Richie, and I were talking, and we are 99% positive we are going to be, thank you. What's in the glass? Well, because it's not morning time. Today's drink is Crown Royal and a ginger ale. It's an old man's drink, but Menu normally is drinking at this time. But yes, Davecon, April 26th through the 28th, 99% positive, we are going to be there. So we're very excited. I see you have Professor DM. For those who are YouTubers, like YouTubers. Christmas 10%, very nice. For those who are watch YouTube, besides Grogtalk, Professor DM is one of the hosts, or one of the guests there. And so he has a great channel, Dungeon Crafts. I'm very excited to go there. Yeah, he's going to be there. Right, Vic? So I think that'll be a great time, besides all the other Minnesotan luminaries. So I'm very excited to be there. Yep, okay. So that's the 26th through the 28th. So I am talking to Rob last night for dinner, and we are planning to be there. So if you can make it, lots of old school gamers and gaming. So we're just talking about getting flights. So hopefully next month we'll be securing that, assuming I'm not having a wedding, I'm not going to be hospitalized. Those are the precluding factors, but this month, 2024, should be good. Second thing, next month, speaking of GrogCon, I'm going to host a kickoff meeting. It's open to everyone. I'll put it on Discord, and really it's just to get ideas, how GrogCon 24, what the theme of it should be, what kind of events you want. We're really going to try to kick it up a notch this year. And so, hopefully we won't have a hurricane. And so I really want to get some great ideas. Rob and Dan and I actually have talked about the tournament module already. So yes, I have. For those who are listening on the podcast, I have decided to take the plunge and just got rid of the 3 tufts of hair I had left. and now it is gone, and it's actually not as much work as I thought it was going to be. But so for tonight, I hope you, or tomorrow, wherever you are, if you're drinking coffee, if you're drinking Canadian whiskey, enjoy the rest of the show. First, I have to say, we have a new member of the Empire. I want to congratulate Todd, who is now and forever will be known in the Empire as the Lord Sublime Majestic or Majesty Viscount Contentious Victor over Riverview on Hawkeye. Long may you reign, sir. So Riverview is a suburb of Tampa, and he has waited patiently for his title. So congratulate him in his new title. Congratulations, sir. What I want to talk about today is something I've been seeing a lot of online, and it's this idea. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing before we continue. You know, let's see. Just reading, catching up. One other thing is the new Flipping and Turning 14 will be released early next month per Rob. Obviously, online copies will be made available first, and then hard copies will be handed out to those patrons of subscribers of a sufficient tier. I've already got a preview of the cover. It is done by Aggie, one of our dear friends, and it is amazing. She's knocked it out of the park. And so if you've not read Flipping and Turning, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's a labor of love, not only of Rob Ritchie, but all the contributors. I have an article in there myself, so it's definitely, yeah, I'm not going to shave my eyebrows. That's not going to, not purposely at least, I'm not going to do that. I will say sometimes in the morning you got the shaver and you're kind of just doing around, and I got to be careful. Unfortunately, a little too much information. There's like 2 or 3 stragglers up here, and sometimes you just have to take in. I'll try not to eliminate my eyebrows, at least purposely. But if you are someone who is interested in old school gaming, you should check out Flipping and Turning. Rob does a great job, and there's so many great contributors. So with that, one thing I wanted to talk about tonight and get everyone's feedback that's out here is there's been a lot of conversation. If you've listened to any of the podcasts that many of us, like Menyon has and Jason, a number of other folks, our old school theme is, we have the DM, we have the players, or the GM and the players. And a lot of the advice is how to get your players engaged and how to make your life easier as a dungeon master or game master. But there's not a whole lot of advice on how, the DM is a player as well. The DM should be having as much fun, and many DMs are quite happy if their players are happy. But as I go on to my 40th year of DMing, that to me is not enough. I want to enjoy the game as much as the players do. So I wanted to give what I'm doing now to enjoy it, because I'm about almost a year into this campaign that I'm running. And this is about the time when I move from being eagerly, start of a campaign, you're excited, you get some development, and now you get into the burnout. And so for me, these are some of the things I'm trying to do in order to enjoy the game, and I think ultimately will help the players who are enjoying it. So, I think that a lot of the advice I also see is about how to run the game. Most of the folks here who listen to Grog Talk, they've been DMing for a long time, and certainly we can always use advice and sharpen our skills, but most of us feel very confident in running a game and have a good grasp of improvisation, pacing. So this is not that advice. My thoughts are, how can you get enjoyment from the game that you're running and not just be a facilitator and only deriving satisfaction when the players are happy, which of course is still a major component. So first I had to think about, yes, Ron's old school reader, absolutely, thank you, good plug, golf clap for that. So I first had to sit down and think, what do I like about DMing? First, it's getting together with friends. It's getting together with the people I've played with for years and spending time together, having a few drinks, having a few laughs. D&D is the primary reason we get together. These friends, for the most part, I don't see outside of D&D, but there's a couple who I do. So getting together is a key thing, and we typically play every 2 weeks. I used to be part of a game that was a weekly online, but I prefer in person, and I prefer every 2 weeks, which seems to be the amount of frequency that most adults who have lives can muster. If you can do it more frequently, more power to you. I also enjoy running the adventure, the physical running of the game at the table. Getting set up, explaining the scenario, seeing the players' reactions, improvising, dealing with that, setting up the challenges, dealing with the pacing. Those are the things I enjoy. I also like to, when I'm thinking about the game, is weaving their choices into the world. What I always appreciate, I'm not a backstory guy. I don't really care about players' backstories. I'm from the old school that if your backstory is more interesting than what you do at the table, why are you adventuring? If you're a first level character and you have a 20-page backstory, your character should be fleshed out from the adventures that you go with the group. And so weaving their choices, typically I run what would be called a sandbox, or they get multiple clues. If they pick a clue, that's what they pursue, and typically those other clues fall away or their choices are made. And so I think that's what I like to do, is so it shows that their choices are meaningful, and it doesn't always have to be, they didn't do X, and so now this army of darkness is coming to wipe them out. Sometimes it's a benign effect, but there should be items that should happen from it. So, what don't I like about running D&D, and particularly a campaign? A one-shot's different. We're talking about a series of adventures with the same party in the world. Prep. I am not a world builder anymore. I mean, I have some ideas, I have some themes I like to do, but sitting here and writing out a bunch of lore and kind of postulating in my brain the world, and I think part of that's due to the players I have. They are not interested in a lot of lore, and sometimes, even in my version of this, I have some deities, and I'm using the world of Mystara, which has a lot of literature associated with it from the 90s. So it's very rich, but when you're dealing with dozens and hundreds of names and hundreds of places, it becomes, and you're not as familiar with them, it becomes tedious. And so I don't, that becomes a challenge. What I try to do, because like most people, I'm busy, I try to prep one day, a couple hours, and get ready for 4 or 5 sessions. I know what I want to do. I know the encounters. I generally have an idea, so that I'm not panicking the time before and then really winging it. I think, I want a little bit, kind of like when I do speeches, I want to outline. I don't want to write it word for word, but I do want to have the parameters that is. So a lot of prep, not a big fan of. The other thing I'm really starting to dislike is player downtime. This is, for me, it's becomes a struggle between what the players want, and typically what do the players want? If they're the players I'm used to, they want to max out their capabilities when the next time they go into the dungeon. So they're trying to, buy as many healing potions if that's available, or magic scrolls, magic items, crafting weapons, buying war dogs, whatever, buying horses. And so all that, since we only meet every 2 weeks, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. So then that means a lot of text messaging back and forth. And now I feel like I've got another job, which is to try to make the world real, make rulings. So, when someone says, hey, I want the local armorer, or excuse me, the weaponsmith, to craft me a gold-plated maul, how long is that going to take? How much is that going to cost? and I come up with some value, and I'm sure there's a rule. And again, some of it makes sense if they don't have magic items and they want silvered weapons because they know they're going to be encountering undead. In the past, I would make that more difficult. I'd say, oh, you have to find a certain smithy and you have to bring the materials and it would take a while. What value am I really providing? Is it really making immersion, or is I'm just making a lot of bookkeeping? Part of this is a result of that in old school games, gold is XP. So as players get higher and higher level, they're getting tons and tons of gold so that they can continue, and treasure, so they can level up. Well, if you don't give them a vehicle to spend it, then what are they doing with it? So, we're kind of a prisoner of their own success. So one of the things, and this is not accountants and ledgers, this is Dungeons and Dragons. But some of the players, especially the ones who are, I'll call them your better players, your active players, they want to see this. They want to have an immersive world. So that is something I'm not a big fan of. Running and then kind of segueing into that is the too many things to remember. I am definitely like lower level campaigns, which again is always a tension because the players, they want to see their characters grow in power and stature. They want to get magic items. They want to get abilities. And it's just more from my little feeble brain to keep track of, not from a challenge perspective, but just to manage as, if you give out intelligent swords that have personality, well, the player typically, if they're your average player, they're not going to remind you, oh, I have a very difficult sword that likes to battle me. Oh, and I'm down hit points, so now there should be a personality conflict. They're not going to remember that, so that's another thing you have to remember. And when they start adding pets and henchmen and hirelings, you have this, again, I understand that's old school, but it becomes unwieldy when you're just trying to focus on how many hit points they have. So where I'm becoming to is, initially when I start a game, we start out in a small town with a dungeon, get their feet wet, see which characters are going to survive, give them reason to get together. But where I'm moving the party to, and again, if you're playing my game, spoiler, I'm moving you towards a mega dungeon and when I mean mega dungeon, it is an area of limited resources that are external to where they're at. So whether it's a lost land that they can't easily get back in and out of, or a mega dungeon, the goal is to prevent or to minimize not the feeling of rest, but this ability to shape the game and spend a lot of time acquiring resources outside of the dungeon environment, which I think in a lot of ways is really what the game was about when it first started. You delved in the dungeon and you were driven to the dungeon because that's where the money was and that's where the treasure is. And so I'm actually going to start, there's a mega dungeon I found that goes from 6 to 26 level or something to that effect. Whether we'll continue for that long, I don't know. But that to me is, we actually played the Barrow Mae. One of our folks who is part of our group, Lane, was running that. And again, what was good is we focused on what our group liked to do. Kicking down doors, killing things, getting treasure, figuring out challenges, and not spending a lot of time on this other stuff. So that's my thoughts. I'd love to know what you all think about it. And if you have a mega dungeon besides Barrow Maze, that kind of fits into this idea. And it doesn't have to be a mega dungeon. It could be, for a lot of times I kept them in X1, the Isle of Dread. Had a similar constraint in that most of it was jungle, it was a hex crawl, they had some small towns, but they weren't going to find a grand sorcerer who had 150 scrolls that they could deal with. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. What are your thoughts? Do you like world building? Do you like dealing with the lore? And more importantly, do your players like it? in my campaign and the campaigns I've typically run, 85% of the players, I'm randomly making up the number, but the majority of the players, vast majority, do not care about your world. They care about their character, they care how it interacts, but they don't care that the guy they're rescuing is the third cousin of the Viscount who was put on the throne because his father was murdered by the ghoul. Exactly. That's exactly right, Jack. He was groaning by the exposition. So, I like the idea of some smaller base that they can heal and they can recover, but it's not an opportunity for them to establish a factory of scroll making or a factory of holy water making, that their outside businesses are more interesting than what they're doing in the dungeon. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, and that's my rant for today. So let me know what you think about that, because I could be maybe changed, and certainly if that's something that you have some great ideas of how to avoid, because I'm trying to avoid the burnout. I'm trying to avoid where the burden of managing higher level characters, abilities, plot threads, this and that with, becomes where it's just too much. And what I usually try to do is wrap up the campaign, get to something I can put a bow on it, because no one likes an unfinished campaign. We've been through too many of them. I'm trying to avoid that. So let me see some of the comments that we have. Yeah, that's good to have overarching plot. Agreed. Let's see. All right. Well, thank you. Kind of wise. Things are going by quickly. Expansive but shallow lore. Okay. I've just found when I've tried to document, and I'm sure like all of you, I've either created OneNote, or I know there's online tools where you start putting all this together, or in the case of Mistar, there's wonderful gazetteers that you can spend days reviewing. My party, for the most part, why are we here? We're taking our ship back and we need to get it repaired. What's available here? They're not interested in the dynamics of the place. Where's the armor? Where's the boar? Where's the magic shop, if there is one? Where's the Fighters Guild, Thieves Guild, et cetera, et cetera? And where's the adventure? And how do we do that? Again, I don't want to make it sound like they're that banal, but when it comes down to it, for most of them, they're not, as soon as they leave the session, they're really not thinking much about the game. And of the 7 or 8 I have, it's maybe 1 or 2 people who are invested, and they're the ones who are texting me. And that's really what propels me to do some of the things, but it's certainly not enough to continue. So with that, last time we got together, I showed you part 1 of my interview with Lou Pulsiver, where we learned a lot of things. And so this time, we're going into some more of his tactics and abilities. So I'll be looking at your chats, and I hope you enjoy part 2 of my interview with Lou at Grogtalk.
Some players want to have a rush of adrenaline, and those are people who want to roll the dice. Now, I noticed in that Dwarven Forge yesterday, the biggest cheer occurred when a guy was rolling saving throw, I think it was, and he rolled a 10, and he didn't know whether that succeeded or not. And the GM finally said, I think that was you, yeah. You saved. Hey! And that's the way things go, because there's a lot of dice in D&D, but it's not really a dice game, because it's like a microcosm of life. In life, if you leave things to chance, you're going to have more problems than the person who doesn't leave so many things to chance. They want to make their saving throw. One of the things that sticks in my mind of all the years of playing D&D is my magic user was on a broom, and he also had boots that let him levitate. Right. And so he'd fly around on the broom above an enemy outdoors, and if necessary, stop, and so on. And somebody cast this disintegrate on him. And I made my saving throw. And that sticks in my mind, because if I'd got disintegrated, it would have been really ugly. Okay, sometimes you have to roll the dice. It's like you don't get to my age without having been lucky in various respects,
But
especially.
you're minimizing the amounts of rolls.
Exactly.
And you shouldn't be looking for, you shouldn't be looking for rolls. It's kind of like playing Texas Hold'em, and you want to go in with the highest probability. You want them to fold, even though you think you're going to win. It's better for them to fold and take the money you have than to say, oh, let's see what happens. Because even though unless it's 100%, you have a chance to lose.
You want to reduce the number of times you have to roll a die to save your bacon.
And as the DM or GM, they should encourage, rolling should be for a plot thing that is indeterminate based on the actions of what the player did. In other words, this idea of, oh, they're climbing walls. I've been as guilty. Like, I'm okay. All of a sudden, I'm making them check every 3 feet. If you read the rules, well, eventually they're going to fail. So just do one time if it's significant. If they're climbing a tree, I'm not going to make them make a roll, even if they're a fighter, unless they've got 300 pounds of junk on them.
Yeah.
Just let them climb the tree. Don't make everything a roll, because unless you really want it to be this chaos. But I've had to pull back the amount of rolling of dice. Make it where, disintegrate, I'm sorry, there was an action you have to deal with. We can't just say, well, I move out of the way. That's when it is. And to your point, you have to minimize that. That's great advice.
Now, a lot of this advice comes down to patience. Simple patience. And the patient adventurer is likely to be more successful than the one who's impatient. But I'm not sure that's something you can teach somebody. They might learn it over time, playing adventures and seeing where impatience did not succeed. But patience is really, really important. And some people are just naturally more patient than others.
And again, depending on what you consider as a good or poor skill of a GM, if the party is deliberating and they're sitting in standing in the dungeon deliberating what they're doing, one of the tips that's given is, well, if they're dilly-dallying too much, start rolling for random encounters, and then you have the tactician who's getting frustrated. It's like, see, we're messing around. See, the DM's rolling dice. We need to move forward. And then you get the Leroy Jenkins moment because people are tired of thinking about it. So as a GM, if they're making progress and it's deliberate, you should probably reward it by not putting random encounters. That's my opinion. Because you don't want a situation where you get people frustrated, and then if you want patience and you want good play, you have to at least give them a chance to figure these things out.
Yes. And of course, the opposite side of patience is you can't wait too long.
Yeah.
You can't get into analysis paralysis, because that's going to end badly.
Yeah, I'm rolling dice. If I see you guys, you're on the third version of this, I'm starting to roll D6s for random encounters or whatever.
And we could say a large proportion of good play depends on good timing, where, again, you can be patient, but when it's time to go, you got to go.
Yeah.
And if you look at the history of many very successful generals in warfare, they knew when to go, or at least most of the time they did, and they knew when not to go. And that's an awful lot of what makes the difference in a battle.
But it's the mindset.
The older I get, the more I see it.
Yeah, the mindset, I think, is something that has to be agreed upon by the group. Are you playing with the right people who see this not as a war game, but as really a campaign in its purest sense, that you are a series of encounters, a series of battles that end up with the determination that you would want to see. So if they don't have that mindset, a lot of this is going to fall either on deaf ears or not be really adhered to the discipline they need.
Okay, now I have reached the sort of philosophy part.
Good.
Tactical styles in combat-oriented role-playing games, fantasy role-playing games. There are two extremes of approaching a fight in a magic-rich environment. These are something akin to American football team that runs the ball constantly, which used to be called 4 yards in a cloud of dust.
Right.
And a team that passes constantly. 60 years ago in football, the 4 yards in a cloud of dust predominated. Nowadays, it's passing, although you'll often see that if one team rushes the ball a lot more than the other, they win. Now, in role-playing game terms, the first method is charge in and cut the enemy down thanks to suitable character classes, lots of perks and magic items, as in the 9th level character I saw not too long ago doing more than 90 hit points of damage in one round. The second is to set up a defense where the specialist spellcasters use area effect and selected individual spells to blow the enemy away. In the first method, the characters are more like running backs and linemen, and in the second, they are quarterbacks and receivers and linemen. And the first, the linemen fire out and try to wipe out whoever's there and make a hole for the running back. In the second, the linemen are doing pass blocking. And they're waiting for the quarterback to do the damage, the quarterback and the wide receivers. Now, since role-playing games are about magic, to me, when I played, I knew I was going to be a magic user. There's never any doubt. I want to see magic prevail. But there are a lot of people who don't. But I think magic prevailing is safer because you're less likely to get caught out. You're less likely to get even your linemen injured, your fighters, and possibly your clerics. And you're just going to be better off. But again, that can depend on the GM. Right. I remember being in a party once where we had no magic user at all. Made me very nervous.
Yeah.
We had a cleric, and we had miscellaneous other people who didn't have magic. That's nuts. And, some people don't want to be the magic user because the magic user often has to stand around. Well, magic users can throw daggers. If you got dwarves in the party, you can certainly throw over their heads. A dagger can do some damage. Get going.
Right. Well, and your idea of this, run or path, I've always seen, and I may not be using the right term, you're a historian, almost like mechanized infantry is what D&D is. You've got this armor that is powerful but is vulnerable to certain attacks, and then you have the infantry supporting it, and the infantry is vulnerable to other attacks, but as long as the armor is in good shape, so you have this kind of combined.
That's the combined arms.
Yeah,
and the combined arms to me in RPGs is to have the magic cooperate with the non-magic.
Right.
And do the things that they're best at. And of course, stealth is very good. Like, what's the job of a monk? The job of a monk is to sneak around to where the enemy magic is and keep it busy so it can't cause harm. And you can talk about rogues in general doing the same thing. To me, that's their objective in a tactical battle. They can only do it for so long because they don't have the hit points and so on, but they can cause great trouble to the enemy when the enemy magic is not functional and your magic is.
And yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I actually wrote a program long ago on my Model 100 and kept track of who did how much damage for an entire big fight, weekend fight.
You were like World of Warcraft before World of Warcraft. You kept track of the damage per damage per
perhaps.
encounter. Yeah, that's great.
Anyway, the magic users did a lot more damage.
Well, it's that whole quadratic power level of the magic user.
The magic users are firepower, and the fighters are melee. And there's, yes, different rules, Lanchester's rules about that sort of stuff, Lanchester's equations, that the firepower does more damage. And of course, it has longer range too. So, to me, you should take advantage of that. If you don't have any magic users, get some magic items if you possibly can. But, if you don't have the magic items either, well, you're in trouble.
And I think good players, we were talking about this last night after the tournament. I will play, there are certain players who will play whatever the party needs, which is, again, a different play style than other players are playing now, which is I want to play the character I want to play. This time I want to play, the paladin, even though we may have 3 other paladins, but it's my turn to play the paladin. Versus, to your point,
I may not want to play the magic user, but we need a magic user, and I understand that magic user I'm playing has to be very tactical, very judicious. I can't just pick mending and message and these spells. I have to pick spells that are appropriate for the game we have. Same thing with the cleric. The cleric may not want to have cure light wounds ×5, but if you're a melee heavy group and you're getting a lot of damage, you need to have healing. You're going to have to pick some of that spells.
Yeah. To me, high-level clerics are slightly insane because there's always been this pressure on them to be hospitals, which I despise.
Right.
You've got to find other ways to cure your guys, or just don't get them hurt. So my high-level clerics tried to get belts of giant strength and like bash down doors and boom, because they saw those damn fighters getting 2 attacks per round and they didn't. But that's just me.
Well, and we've put in the mechanic and I think ways to allow them to have different spells, because it is unfortunate that all they're doing is just healing.
Well, my house rule is they can memorize twice as many as they can use, and that takes care of that.
Oh, okay.
So they can memorize a bunch of cure light wounds, but they don't necessarily use them because they've memorized another set of other spells.
Gotcha.
And that's simple. And I also let clerics choose one kind of weapon that they could use in addition to the blunt weapons. So they could choose two-handed swords or one-handed swords or even bows. And that worked to help make the cleric more reasonable. Of course, I always let thieves have 6-sided hit dice too instead of 4-sided, because 4-sided is just nuts. But everybody has their house rules, and someday I should write articles about my house rules.
Yeah, lose rules. That can be it.
Now, to go back to this analogy of 4 yards of a cloud of dust and passing, the cloud of dust treats the fight more as a sport, I think, and the pass them to death treats it more as war.
Right.
But that's my point of view. And the passing relies heavily on cooperation.
Yeah.
Whereas the running can rely on one really great running back. If you got O.J. Simpson or Barry Sanders in there, your offensive line may not be that good, but they can still do really well. So the running style runs to individual flair. And obviously I'm in favor of cooperation rather than individual flair. If you got those flair guys and they can do their great running, that's fine, but still my main idea is pass them to death. Use magic to kill things or to achieve whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, both ultimately in football, American football, which is a little different in that it's a time constraint and there is some attrition, but it's not permanent attrition. People can get injured. You're trying to exert your will and overwhelm them so that they will give up the fight. They'll play, but they're not winning. One is you beat them into submission. The other one you continue to score so much that there's no way they can catch up and they just say, I give up. So to your point, I agree with you. In the context of D&D, you don't want to trade blows with them. And that's where the hit point inflation is a problem, because people go, I got 70 hit points, so I'll just trade blows with you.
Oh, but now I don't have 70 hit points anymore. Yeah.
But they think, oh, that's when the cleric, and then you get this cycle of they fight, they lose 20 hit points, and then they're immediately going to the cleric.
And don't get me wrong, fighters wade in. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary, and you can have great fun just slaughtering things, but that's not the objective of doing well. And I have a quotation here from Sir Winston Churchill, but a lot of other people have said the same thing. Battles are won by slaughter and maneuver. The greater the general, the more he contributes in maneuver, the less he demands in slaughter. And I take maneuver in its broadest sense of using stratagems, which I'll get to at some point if we have time, and using magic instead of relying on brute force. Now, we've already talked about who do you trust in relation to whether people will conform to this particular way of playing. Know your objective and stick to it is good advice, because a lot of people, again, don't follow the plan because they don't have to follow the plan, and then they get themselves in a lot of trouble. And you need to know whether your objective is to get the treasure and get out or to kill the dragon. It's two very different things, and you have to go about it very different ways.
Right.
And in that respect, if you don't have enough information to lead you to a specific goal, then you might have to run an adventure that's a scouting expedition and gather information. Now, it's not likely people will do this anymore, but the advice was, this is from 40 years ago, keep a monster chronicle. In other words, a really avid player tactician will write down notes about the monsters that you've encountered and not rely just on memory. And of course, some people have better memories than others. I have a good memory, so I don't write down what I should, probably.
Well, and well, I think that's great advice, and I still think it's pertinent today because, especially if you've been playing for 40 years, you've played multiple editions. A ghoul in first edition versus second edition versus, or a dragon in first edition, they have nuances. And I've had games where the party was convinced that this monster did this or didn't do this, and they were incorrect. Even if it was a canon monster, they just forgot. We had a situation, in first edition dragons can see invisible creatures. So, but they forgot that thing, and so they're all drinking their little potions of invisibility, cast invisibility. They're trying to sneak in, and then they were stunned when they got breathed on by acid because they were. So I think that's very important. And if you're a DM who likes to mix it up and say, well, everyone's a goblin, that's what the villagers call all creatures. They're all goblins or they're all demons, or you need to keep track of that. So I think that's very important because you forget. Even if it's memory, your canonical knowledge is not what you think it is. That's a great point.
Right, and I remember playing D&D with the 3 booklets and Greyhawk, and we had the monsters memorized and so on and so forth. And I'm sure people do that with 5th edition today, but in general, memories are just not as good as writing things down. Of course, if you write it down and don't look at it, it doesn't help you.
Yeah.
But now we have all kinds of notebook computers and so on to keep track of that information. It makes it easier than writing it down longhand, which is how we had to do it back when. Provide for rescue escape, which we've talked some about before. But the ultimate thing there is you have a wish and you leave it with somebody reliable, whoever that might be, so that if your party leaves and never comes back, they can use, say, commune to find out whether you're all dead. And if you are, wish it away. That's what wishes are for to me, not for other things. But most people, they want to use up a wish to do something much less important than saving the entire party.
Very banal and not something really relevant.
Security in camp, this is an odd one. When you're outdoors or even indoors, yes, you have to keep people on watch, but there are lots of things you can do, like set up alarm bells if you have some, or we used to put up a wire 6 inches high with little bells on it, some distance out, so that anybody walking through would ring the bells, and then we could wake up and deal with whatever it happened to be. And you can think of other tricks like that that make your camp safer. What you can't do is build a Roman camp like a Roman army, because they had lots of slaves to build the camp, and their 4 legions were occupying 25 kilometers of road. So the guys who got there first would build the camp, and by the time the guys who got there in the end, the camp was built. But you can't do that in D&D. Barbed wire is a wonderful thing, but you can't keep barbed wire and put it around the camp every time. It's too hard to deal with. Okay, now here's one that's a general point of view for the whole thing. Avoid mental passivity. You want active players, not passive players. Now, people aren't active all the time in everything they do. They're not passive all the time in everything they do. But in certain areas of endeavor, they will likely be one or the other. So I would say wargamers tend to be active. They want to make things happen rather than have things happen to them. People who are in the game for the story want things to happen to them. They're not so interested in making things happen. And that's what happens when you watch a blockbuster movie. You're entirely passive. when you read a comic book, you have to put some imagination into it. When you read a novel, you have to put more imagination into it. And that's why some people will watch movies but not read novels, because they're being passive. Well, if you have players who are active in a role-playing game, they will be trying to think of ways to do things better. They will be trying to think of what their role is and what they need to do in that respect. And that's much better than passive players who just sort of point me in the right direction and I'll whack it. Now, you can cope with those by having them be fighters or other types that are really good at melee and point them in the right direction and have them whack it. And if they're willing to do what you tell them to do, that's fine. They serve their purpose.
As a DM, how do you, if you're the GM, how do you, because clearly we want active players, how do you encourage that style of play?
Well, of course, you can ask people, what do you think we should do? You can try to bring them into the discussion. But some people just don't want to say a whole lot. And you know, I am naturally a reticent person. I'll listen rather than talk, but I've learned from teaching and so on that sometimes you got to talk. And you can point out to people that when they've been passive, but some people are just going to be passive, and then you learn how to work them into the party. Now, another thing here, again, old campaigns, multiple GMs, multiple characters, and also we like to have a party of 6 to 8 characters. And if you only had 4 players, you have 8 characters by having each player play 2 characters.
Right.
So if one of those is a magic user and one of those is somebody who really gets involved in things, then they don't mind so much that they have a magic user. The magic user will do things when he or she needs to. They've got something to focus on. So actually, I think it makes for a better game if the players are willing to do it. I've run into lots of players that say, oh, I don't know how I could possibly play 2 characters.
We used to play with 2 characters all the time.
And I think that's partly because they're wanting to be actors rather than vicarious participators. Because if they're vicarious participators, when they're that character, they just do what they do as that character. Whereas if they're actors, they've got to figure, well, what's this character's motivations and what are they going to do and what's their background and blah, blah. You know, one of the things that we never did and don't to this day is write detailed backgrounds.
You don't have a 12-page backstory for your characters?
I don't have a 1-page backstory. I don't have a paragraph backstory.
Right.
The characters get their character from the adventures.
Exactly.
And the other thing that does is, if you have a 12-page backstory, the referee's a lot more inclined to not kill you, or not let you die. And I think that's what happens in a lot of the story campaigns. They have all these big backstories, and the GM tries to incorporate the backstories into the game. But I've watched games that I call Me Too D&D, or whatever game it was, where the players tended to interact one-on-one with the referee, the GM, and everybody else would watch. And they would do their thing and so on. Then the next person, and they would do their thing and so on, and then the next person. So most of the time, the other players weren't participating in the game, which strikes me as terribly boring. But that's the way they like to do it, so they could have their 15 minutes to shine. And that's related to storytelling instead of playing a game.
It was, your point of that is they're part of it. If they are listening, they're actively listening to see what that person is doing so they can incorporate it into their story when it's their turn. So it's almost improvisation, where it's like an improv group that they're getting together. And that's what they're emphasizing. They're still playing a game. They're rolling dice. There is part of the D&D, but that's what the emphasis is versus the style of play that we're used to and we think is truer to the older game is, again, you're more of an avatar. You respect the boundaries that it has. Clearly, if you're a paladin, you're certain things versus a thief. But you're not consumed by the background of that. And you're not going to just rule the thing. You're there for a collaborative mission. Yeah, excellent.
Yes, it's coordinated efforts is what you need if you're going to succeed. Now, I have a note here about keeping reserves in reserve. And that includes bodyguards. If you have enough characters, you can assign a bodyguard to the chief magic user or two chief magic users. Their job is to keep them safe because they're going to do most of the damage. They're the quarterbacks, in effect. It's like keeping a running back in to block for the quarterback. And this can prove very effective if you have enough characters. Now, one of the big changes in D&D was 3rd edition D&D, where they recommended a party of 4 characters.
Right.
You can't do much cooperation. You can't protect the back. You can't assign bodyguards because there's only 4 of you. So that meant individual characters had to be kind of one-man armies.
Yep.
Or one-woman armies. And so even a magic user, he could be getting meleeed and he can still cast spells and so on. And he might have to make a saving throw, but he can do it. I think it was a much worse game. Just by changing the number of characters. One of Lou's laws of survival in games, in RPGs, is the survivability of the party varies with the square of the number of party members. So a party of 4 has a survivability of 16, and a party of 8 has a survivability of 64. In other words, 4 times as much.
Even though they're twice the size, right?
Even though it's twice the size, it's 4 times the survivability. 4 guys, if you're really low level and you get hit with a sleep spell and things go badly, you're all done.
Yep.
You're dead. 8 guys, it's pretty hard to put 8 to sleep at once. So I advocate larger parties, but the rules advocated small parties. Well, when I DM'd 3rd edition, I just made them bigger parties. The hell with you guys. At least that's something you can change.
Well, and I think in 5th edition, not that I played a whole lot of it, but they've moved towards the pets and the familiars and the different, these sort of surrogate creatures that are there. So now
They amount to another party member.
right, they have these proxy abilities. So each of them have a pet or a familiar or some other thing, a sentient magic item. All these other, so you've got this cacophony of things that they do, and instead, and this mitigates the, you know, even though you had 2 characters, you tried, at least the GM would typically try to say, hey, you can't just like treat them as, you know, schizophrenia where they're the same person, you have 2 personalities. You know, the magic user is not going to give his 10,000 gold pieces to the fighter just for no
Right,
reason.
they still have to be separate, yes.
This mitigated that by now. Well, they're basically just extensions of the one player, but they get all the features of it. You know, I can send my familiar to do this, and they can attack, they can do everything else, but they're completely subjective to, subjugated to the main character. And now you've got these pets with armor and all this other stuff, and you know, my ability to deal with multiprocessing, using a computer term, multitasking, multi-threading is become diminished. And I like the idea of 2 characters I can deal with. 2 characters with 3 henchmen and 4, you know, there's a cast of thousands, and that's too much. Not fun. Now we've got an army moving around.
I remember having a homunculus way back when.
Sure.
And they were fine until they got dead, and then you took 2 to 20 hits, so you had to be fairly high level. And the 3rd time I had a homunculus turned into a popsicle was the last homunculus. You know, a cold blast from a wand, and he didn't have a prayer. He had 2 hit dice. I suppose I should say, and that was that. No more homunculi for me.
Best use of the mending spell, folks, for those keeping at home. You need a mending spell to make homunculus.
So again, great interview time. I had a great time with Lou. You know, a couple of things that, you know, as I see on the chat, for those who are listening to the podcast later, Lou is giving really almost self-evident kind of tactics, but how many times have you been in a group where parties don't focus their fire? They don't protect magic users who can change the tide of battle. They don't attack. They can't do threat assessment because, you know, they're attacking the frontline guys while the evil cleric is throwing hold person or the magic users changing the battle. They don't hire NPCs. They don't do a lot of the things that will keep their party alive. And you know, at least for me as the dungeon master, it's almost, you know, it's like we're doing elementary D&D, and we don't get to any advanced D&D because if you create encounters that have environment or these other things, they won't survive because they haven't mastered the beginning tactics. So again, I would encourage us to kind of look this over, to remind ourselves when we're players, and not be shy when, yes, it is. He's sitting here. We were listening to the dulcet tones of Lou. Again, I would encourage folks to take these, and I'll see if he's going to write this up. He was working on an article or a book. I'm going to ask him if he's codified these notes. Again, part 3 will be next time. I'm hoping to do something before the end of the year. It may be a premiere not live, with the holidays coming up. That's always, it is. So, but if it doesn't work out because life happens, I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from Jack and I. 2023 was great, but it was also, with Dan moving on. I'm looking forward to an exciting 2024. Some of the things that are upcoming is I'm hoping to finish my interview with Laurel and John of Undead fame from Rolaids and their Smoldering Dung published Severed Fate. They're also working on another World of Grogtalk module for the Duchy of Death. So I'm just glad that we're moving forward, and again, I'm glad you're all appreciating this. So for Grog Talk, I'm James. I'll see you on the Discord. If you're not out there, those are in the show notes. Please join us. There's some great conversations, and we'll see you next time on Grog Talk. Take care.
Grog Talk was taped in front of a live studio audience.
We don't got no dragonborn in Hamlet. A dwarven magic use you won't see. Clerics must have deities to worship, as written in the holy DMG. We like delving dungeons and loot. Every orc is evil through and through, and we don't stay our hands and spare their children like the 5e hippies in the game stores do. And I'm proud to be a first edition grognard, living by the dice and Gare's decrees. We fear only level drain and poison, and DM smiling wide behind the screen. We don't play heroes with long backstories. We fight for our lives to get XP, and there's nothing better than tell the glory of that one time we survived to level 3. And I'm proud to be a first edition grognard, living by the dice and Gare's decrees. We fear only level drain and poison, and DM smiling wide behind the screen, and DM smiling wide behind the screen. We love first edition AD&D.